Good day everyone, I am Arabelle Chanson and today I will be discussing problem-based learning and project-based learning approaches in language acquisition. So in this presentation, I will explain what problem-based learning and project-based learning are, compare and contrast the two approaches, analyze sample PBL plan and DepEd aligned plan, and discuss how these approaches can help learners acquire language and develop communication skills. So, for today's presentation, I will cover several important points. First, I will discuss problem-based learning or PBL, then I will explain project-based learning or PGPL. After that, I will compare the two approaches and discuss their similarities and differences. I will also analyze the sample PBL lesson plan and a DepEd aligned plan. So finally, I will explain how these approaches facilitate language acquisition, including their strengths, challenges, and recommendation for teachers. So, by the end of this presentation, we should be able to achieve several objectives. First, we should understand the meaning of problem-based learning and project-based learning. Second, we should be able to compare their purposes, processes, and expected outputs. Third, we should be able to analyze a sample PBL lesson plan and relate these approaches to language acquisition. And lastly, we should understand how teachers can align these approaches with learning competencies and assessment. So, what is problem-based learning? So, let us begin with problem-based learning or PBL. Problem-based learning is a learner-centered approaches that begins with a meaningful problem or situation. Instead of simply giving a student information and asking them to memorize it, the teacher presents a problem that students need to investigate and solve. Students work together, identify what they already know, determine what they need to learn, gather information, and develop possible solution. So, the teacher here serves mainly as a facilitator who guides students throughout the process. So, the next slide is the key features of PBL. So, there are several important characteristics of problem-based learning. So, first, there is realistic and meaningful problem. The problem should be connected to students' experiences. The second one is students' inquiry, where learners investigate and search for information. The third one is collaboration, because students usually work together. And the fourth one, the teacher acts as a facilitator rather than simply giving the answer. So finally, the students apply what they have learned and reflect on the learning process. Therefore, PBL focuses not only on the answer, but also on the process of discovering and solving the problem. So, the next slide is the PBL process. In the PBL process can be summarized into several steps. First, the teacher presents the problem. The second is students identify what they already know about the situation. And the third, they identify what they still need to learn. Fourth, they investigate and gather information. Fifth, they discuss possible solutions. After that, they present their proposed solution and reflect on what they learned. So in this process, encourages students to become active participants in their own learning. Next slide is the PBL in language learning. PBL means problem-based learning. Problem-based learning is especially useful in language learning because language becomes a tool for communication and problem solving. For example, the students may need to discuss a problem in English, ask questions, explain their opinions, and present recommendations. Throughout this process, students naturally practice speaking and listening. They can also develop reading and writing skills when they research information and prepare their final output. Vocabulary and grammar are also learned within meaningful context and rather than only through memorization. So in the next slide is the example of PBL language task. So here is an example of a PBL activity for language learning. The problem is students hesitate to speak English. So instead of simply teaching students vocabulary about communication, the teacher asks students to investigate why this happens. So students can interview or survey their classmates. They can then discuss the results in groups. After analyzing the information, they propose practical solution and present the recommendation in English. Through this activity, students are learning English while solving an actual communication problem. So what is project-based learning? Now, let's move to project-based learning or PGBL. Project-based learning is also learner-centered, but its main focus is completing a meaningful project. Students investigate a question or goal and work through several stages, including planning, researching, creating, revising, and presenting. Unlike PBL, where the main outcome is usually solution to a problem, project-based learning generally result in a concrete product or performance. So in the next slide is the features of PGBL. Project-based learning has several important key features. It usually begins with a challenging questions or goal. Students conduct research and inquiry plan their activities, collaborate with their classmates, and create a product. They may revise their work based on feedback before presenting it to audience. Reflection is also important because students need to think about what they learned and how they completed the project. So, in language learning, project-based learning provides opportunities for students to use English throughout the entire project. For example, students may conduct research which develops reading skills. When they plan and write their project, they practice writing. When they discuss their ideas with group members, they develop speaking and listening skills. And finally, when they present their project, they develop confidence and communication skills. So here is an example of project-based learning activity. So our goal is to promote English communication in school. So the students could research the communication experiences of their classmates. After gathering information, they can plan an advocacy campaign. They might create posters, videos, podcasts, or other materials. And finally, they present their campaign to an audience. So, this project allows students to use different language skills while producing something meaningful. So, in the next slide, PBL versus PGBL main difference. Now, we can look at the main difference between PBL and PGBL. The easiest way to remember the difference is problem-based learning focuses on solving a problem, while project-based learning focuses on creating a product or completing a project. For PBL, the expected outcome could be a solution or recommendation. For PGBL naman, the expected outcome is usually a concrete product, performance, or completed project. Although they are different, both approaches encourage students to actively participate in learning. Next slide is the comparison of PBL and PGBL. These slides gives us more detailed comparison. PBL usually starts with a problem, while PGBL may start with a question, topic, or goal. PBL emphasizes investigation and solving the problem, while PGBL emphasizes planning, researching, creating, revising, and presenting. In PBL, the students act mainly as investigators and problem solvers, while in PGBL, they become researchers, designers, creators, and presenters. However, in both approaches, the teacher serves as the facilitator. Despite their differences, PBL and PGBL have many similarities. Both approaches are learner-centered. Both encourages collaboration and active participation. Both develop critical thinking and communication skills. They also use meaningful and authentic situations. Most importantly, for language acquisition, both approaches provide opportunities for students who actually use the language rather than simply memorizing the language itself. So, in the next slide, how they facilitate language acquisition. Now, let's focus on how these approaches facilitate language acquisition. For speaking, students participate in discussion and presentations. For listening, they need to understand their classmate and other source of information. For reading also, they research articles, websites, and other materials. And for writing, they create reports, proposals, scripts, and also reflections. They also develop vocabulary because they encounter words in meaningful context. Grammar is practiced naturally as students communicate and express their ideas. Now, let us now analyze a sample problem-based learning plan. The problem is that some students are hesitant to communicate in English. The objectives are for students to identify possible causes, gather information, and propose solutions. The activities begin with presenting the problem. The students then investigate it, discuss their findings, and develop a solution. The final output is a communication action plan. For assessment, the teacher can consider language use, reasoning, collaboration, and presentation skills. This shows that PBL integrates both content learning and language development. So, in the next slide is DepEd aligned PBL plan. So this is an example of a DepEd aligned PBL plan focusing on promoting effective English communication. The teacher begins by presenting a school-based communication problem. Students then investigate the problem through interviews or surveys. After then gathering information, they analyze their finding and create an action plan. The group then present and defend their solutions. And finally, students write a reflection about what they learned. So this type of lesson connects classroom learning with a real situation experienced by the students. So, what to check in a DepEd plan? So when analyzing a DepEd lesson plan, there are several things we need to check. First, the activities should be aligned in the learning competencies. Second, the objectives should be measurable. Third, the activities should be relevant and appropriate for the learners. Fourth, students should have opportunities to collaborate. Technology can also be included when it supports the learning objectives. And finally, the assessment should measure whether students actually achieve the intended competencies. And the next slide is the assessment for PBL and PGBL. So, assessment is an important part of both PBL and PGBL. Teachers can assess students based on their understanding of the problem or task. They can also assess the quality of the solution or project. For language learning, teachers should evaluate the students' use of the target language. Other criteria may include critical thinking, collaboration, participation, presentation skills, and reflection. Rubrics are useful because they make the expectation and criteria clear to the students. So in the next slide is the strengths and challenges. In PBL and PGBL have many strengths. They can increase students' engagement, develop communication skills, promote critical thinking, and encourage collaboration. They also provide authentic opportunities for students to use language. However, there are also challenges. These approaches can require more time and preparation. Some students may participate more than others. Teacher may also experience difficulties when assessing individual contributions. Limited resources or technology can also affect implementation. Therefore, careful planning is necessary. So in the next slide is recommendation for teachers. To implement PBL and PGBL effectively, teachers should choose problems and projects that are relevant and realistic for their students. Teachers should also align activities with learning competencies because students may have different levels of language proficiency. Teachers should provide scaffolding, examples, vocabulary support, and sentence patterns when necessary. Teachers should monitor individual participation and use appropriate rubrics. Technology should be used only when it genuinely supports the learning objectives. So, to summarize the major points of the presentation, first, PBL focuses on solving meaningful problems. Second, PGBL focuses on creating meaningful products or completing projects. Both approaches are learner-centered and encourage collaboration and critical thinking. Most importantly, both provide authentic opportunities for learners to use language through speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Effective implementation requires clear objectives, appropriate activities, meaningful context, and aligned assessment. So to conclude, problem-based learning and project-based learning can transform language learning into a more active and meaningful experience. Instead of simply memorizing vocabulary and grammar, students use language to investigate, communicate, collaborate, solve problems, and create meaningful outputs. These approaches, therefore, develop not only language proficiency, but also critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication skills. The most important idea that we can take from this presentation is that students learn language best when they have meaningful reasons to use it. And with PBL and PGBL, language becomes not only something students study, but something they actively use to learn and accomplish real-world tasks. And for the final slide, these are the references that were used in preparing the presentation. These include materials from the Department of Education, the ALS East Handbook, the English Prototype Syllabi Compendium, and other educational resources. So the references are presented using the EPA 7th edition format. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.